Hello, my name is Stephen Barani. I'm a professor at the University of Ottawa, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the panel Peace with Justice in Colombia, ? This webinar has been organized by 3 organizations in partnership. First, the Center for International Policy Studies at the University of Ottawa, with the Just Governance Group, as well as the Latin American and Caribbean Study Group of the Canadian International Council. The Havana Peace Accord, signed by the State of Colombia and the FARC-EP guerrilla in 2016, offers a basis to redress conflict and unsustainable development in Colombia. As one of our panelists, Wade Davis, has written, rarely in history has a nation state been given such an opportunity to envision its future and such a reprieve from the industrial forces that have devastated so much of the world over the past half-century. Some parts of that accord are being implemented, yet Colombian human rights activists worry that key parts of plans for transitional justice, or TJ, for the truth about past violations to be recognized, for the accused to be tried, for affected communities to be compensated, and for the country to begin the long process of reconciliation, that some of those important agreements, commitments are being blocked. So what is the state of peace implementation today, almost 5 years after the Havana Accords were signed? Where is there progress? Where is it being blocked, particularly with regards to transitional justice? Why? Why, given the agendas and the power relations of key national and international stakeholders? And finally, what does this all mean for the vision of a new Colombia evoked earlier? We're very fortunate today to have 3 panelists who have expertise on different pieces of the Colombian puzzle. Wade Davis is a professor of anthropology and BC Leadership Chair in Cultures and Ecosystems at Risk at the University of British Columbia. He is also the author of the book, Magdalena, River of Dreams. He will provide an overview of peace implementation and its prospects in Colombia. Then Paola Jimenez, a Bogota-based expert on gender and development with the Just Governance Group, will delve into issues at the intersection of gender and transitional justice. And finally, Nelson Ovalle Diaz, who's a professor of law and an associate of the Human Rights Research and Education Center at the University of Ottawa, will speak to the special jurisdiction and its treatment of exemplary cases based on his extensive publications and ongoing research into these institutions. My colleague Kimberly Ingsater, Executive Director of the Just Governance Group, will chair a question and answer session after the 3 panelists have made their presentations. If you have questions that you'd really like to get into the chat before Q's and A's, feel free to send them in, but they will only be answered once the panelists have finished their presentations and the Q's and A begin. So without further ado, let me pass the virtual mic over to Wade Davis. It's all yours, Wade.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's wonderful to be with you all. And I'll just quite quickly to give a slight overview. I think travelers always become enchanted with the first land they encounter that gives them license to be free. And for me, it was Colombia, the limitless coastal Caribbean plain, the great reaches of the Cordilleras, the Paramos, the endless llanos of the Northeast, the Amazon forest, the Pacific forest, the Choco. All these areas sort of opened up a wider vista to a world that I would spend my lifetime trying to understand. And this strange kind of love affair between a Canadian boy and a country and a people began innocently enough in 1968 when my mother, a humble Canadian but determined Canadian woman, told me that Spanish was the language of the future. And she worked all year as a secretary in elementary school to raise enough money to allow me to join a small school group being led by a professor to the city of Cali. And I was the youngest of the group at 14. The others were 16 and 17, and the most fortunate, because whereas these boys were billeted with wealthy families and spent a sweltering season in the streets of Cali, I was with a more modest family in the mountains above the city. And it was a kind of classic Colombian scene, you know, children too numerous to keep track of, an indulgent father, a grandmother who muttered to herself on the porch overlooking fruit trees and flower beds, an angelic sister who more than once carried her brother and me home half drunk, to a mother kind beyond words who stood by the garden gate, tapping her foot on the stone steps as she pretended to be mad. And many of the other lads suffered from what the Colombians call mamitis, or homesickness. And I, who never saw any of them all summer long, I felt quite the opposite. I felt like I'd finally found home. And 6 years later, I returned in 1974 to Colombia with a one-way ticket, a small backpack of clothes, and just 2 books, Lawrence's Taxonomy of Vascular Plants and Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And I believe that bliss was an objective state that you could achieve by simply opening yourself to the world. And both literally and metaphorically, I drank from every stream, even from tire tracks on the road. And naturally, I was constantly sick, but that seemed part of the process itself, malarial fevers that rose through the night to break through the dawn. And once on just 24-hour notice, I accepted a commission to guide an eccentric Englishman 250 miles across the swamps and rainforests of the Darien. We got lost for 10 days with no food. It was a horrendous passage in the rainy season when finally I found my way to safety in Panama. I got off a small plane with just the ragged clothes on my back, drenched in vomit from my fellow passengers, $2 to my name, and yet never had I felt more alive. And along the way, I became an acolyte of the great Amazonian explorer, Richard Evans Schultes, who had also found his destiny in Colombia. And when I came to write his biography, a book that was known as One River, it was inevitable that book would be a love letter to a nation by then scorned by the world. It's interesting, the book El Rio came out in Spanish in 2002, a year that marked a low point in Colombia's fortunes. And at a time when the country's very ability to endure was being called into question, it's curious that a book on botanical exploration would hit such a nerve. But the power of the book lay in the beauty of the translation by the late Nicholas Sescuan. And by the time the 3rd edition came out in 2009, I had a stronger sense of its success. By then, the nation had really become a pariah in the world. Leading political figures were regularly challenged in the foreign press, and a story well known and repeated frequently in the Colombian street, Carolina Barco, the daughter of a revered president, former external affairs minister, herself at the time the Colombian ambassador to Washington, D.C., was strip searched at Dulles Airport simply because she had a Colombian passport. And when she complained and presented her diplomatic credentials, the American customs agents barked an obscenity at her as if echoed from the mouth of a dog. And Colombians, most of whom have never used or seen cocaine, one of my closest friends tells a story when she was a 15-year-old paisa in Medellin, when her family realized that she could not tell the difference between the sound of thunder and the sound of bombs. They sent her to live with Miami with a grandmother, and she was immediately made fun of for being from the city of Escobar by Miami high school students whose main social activity was the pursuit of recreational drugs, with Colombian cocaine being the drug of choice. And so for more than 50 years, Colombia has been convulsed by a brutal conflict that left as many as 260,000 dead, 100,000 missing. Every single family has suffered. Yet incredibly, in a nation of 50 million, there were never more than 300,000 combatants on all 3 sides of this fratricidal war. The vast majority of the Colombian people were caught in the vice of war, innocent victims of a conflict that would not have lasted a day had it not been for the flow of illicit money from the drug trade. At the height of its power, the Medellin cartel was shipping 80 tons of cocaine into the United States every month, generating tens of millions of dollars every day. At the height of their influence, the accountants back in Medellin budgeted $1,000 a week simply to buy elastic bands in which to wrap the illicit cash. To estimate the value of the haul, they would bail the $100 bills in hay bales to estimate their value. And critically, without that black money siphoned off, readily spent, the struggle of the leftist guerrillas probably would have fizzled out years ago, and the blood-said paracos, the paramilitary forces responsible for 80% of the bloodshed in the war, might never have come into being. It's incredible, as the peace negotiations began in Havana in the last year before the settlement, the FARC, though down to 6,000 cadre, mostly young children, young men and boys and girls in search of a meal, nevertheless generated $600 million through extortion and drug trafficking. Well, if you gave me the Beverly Hills Boy Scouts and $600 million, I promise you I could wreak havoc in all of Southern California. Colombians, most of whom have never used, let alone seen cocaine, have lived with the trade, the consequence of the trade for 2 generations. In 2000, a kidnapping occurred every 3 hours of every day. Altogether, at least 30,000 men, women, and children ripped from their homes. By 2012, over 5 million Colombians, by either coercion or volition, obligation, had left the country. Within the country, there were 7 million internally displaced. Imagine how differently the United States would feel about its patterns of drug consumption in boards and bar rooms across the country if, as a result of those obsessions, in Canada, for example, together with laws that created the potential for a black market trade, but sanctions that did nothing to limit that trade, if Canada had those patterns of drug consumption such that 85 million Americans would be forced to flee their homes. Well, that's precisely what happened in Colombia. And cocaine has been Colombia's curse, but the engine driving the train has always been consumption. The cartels rose out of the barrios and the country clubs of Cali and Medellin, but ultimate responsibility for Colombia's agonies lies in good measure with every person who has ever used illicit cocaine and any government who has made possible the illicit trade by prohibiting the drug without curbing its use in any serious way. And this continues, incidentally, until today. But Colombia, of course, is most assuredly not a place of violence and drugs. It is a place of colores y cariño, where the people have endured and overcome these years of conflict precisely because of their character, which I think is informed by an enduring spirit of place, a kind of deep love of a land that is most bountiful on the planet, home to the greatest ecological, geographical, and biological diversity on the planet. And it speaks volumes to the character of the Colombian people, that through all these years of war, a war largely imposed upon the nation, Colombia, for all of its challenges, has nevertheless managed to maintain civil society, maintain democracy, green its cities, create millions of acres of national parks, and in many ways sought restitution with indigenous people, particularly under the leadership of Virgilio Barco and Martin van Hildebrand, with the creation of over 152 resguardos in the Northwest Amazon, an area of land collectively the size of the United Kingdom that was codified in the 1991 Constitution as being the land of the indigenous people. No nation state can match that accomplishment. And through all of these terrible years, the Colombian people have managed to maintain those elements. And today they are posed on the edge of peace, and you have 2 generations of young people who have been forced to leave the country and dwell abroad, who are now returning to the country with skill sets in every conceivable endeavor, posing the country on the edge of a potential economic renaissance of tremendous significance. But of course, through all of this time, the war has raged. And in 2002, Álvaro Uribe was elected as a hardliner with Juan Manuel Santos as his defense minister. And in an agreement with the Paracos in 2006, that was by no means a perfect agreement, flawed by design, it nevertheless allowed Uribe to take the Paracos off the stage, at least as an open marauding force that didn't eliminate their power. It certainly didn't sanction their activities, but it did remove them from the stage. And then when the agreement came with the FARC, to some extent, I think Santos was obliged to do the same. As President Santos always say, you make peace with your enemies, not with your friends. And so by the same token in Havana, the FARC had to be given an opening to re-enter the society. Neither the Paracos or the leftist forces, the ELN, the FARC and other groups were about to walk out of the forest and simply walk into a jail cell. And the peace agreement that became so controversial was brought to a referendum on October 2nd. And I remember I was there the evening before the vote, and there was a sense of euphoria within the country, particularly in Bogota. And then, of course, a sense of rejection and dejection the next day when the referendum was narrowly defeated, 50.2% to 49.8%, a difference of less than 54,000 votes of the 13 million cast. And of course, the vote against the referendum for peace was cast by those who felt the FARC had got off too easily. But these were the same folks who weren't that concerned when the Paracos got off so easily in 2006. Mercifully, the momentum shifted 5 days later when President Juan Manuel Santos was awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace. And this created a new sense of momentum. He hadn't been obliged legally to put the agreement to a national vote. He did that by choice. And of course, in the wake of the defeat of that referendum, he was still legally capable of moving that referendum through the Colombian Congress, which he chose to do. This may have been legal, but it was not politically popular. And as a consequence of that, there was a tremendous sort of movement, in a sense, against the agreement and the subsequent federal election, whereby Santos, of course, was not constitutionally able to run. And the conflict within Colombia split a divided field and allowed a protege of Álvaro Uribe, the current president, Duque, to win the office. And so we had, I think, a critical point in Colombia's history where, had there been the opportunity for somebody who truly believed in the potential of the agreement to have another 6 years, say, in office, then I think the scenario might be very different. But for better or for worse, Duque ran in part challenging the legitimacy of the agreement. And to be charitable, his administration has been lukewarm to that agreement. Now, the agreement wasn't trivial. The agreement had over 578 terms to it. The implementation of it was going to cost $45 billion. Now, this is at a time when Colombia's main source of foreign revenue, oil, collapsed. And at the same time, Colombia was called upon to deal with the greatest humanitarian crisis in the history of Latin America, as 2 million refugees from Venezuela came into Colombia. And to the country's enormous credit, and it stands in marked contrast to what was occurring at the Mexican-American border, as innocent men, women, and children cast north by the chaos of the very drug trade in question, chaos originally sown by US foreign policy during the Reagan era that disrupted nation states from Guatemala and Nicaragua to Salvador and Honduras. As this mass of humanity came north, children were taken away from families. As recently as October of last fall, there were 525 children in cells on the American side of the border, the whereabouts of their parents being unknown. By contrast, Colombia, in its own moment of need, in the most extraordinary humanitarian gesture, welcomed 2 million mothers, children, and fathers, grandparents. They housed them, they fed them, they looked after them medically, and they sent their kids to school. And to Duque's credit, he only recently gave them legal status to work in the country. I can promise you, whatever side of the political spectrum you fall upon, no nation state in the history of Americas has done such a generous gesture at a moment of its own peril. So part of the problem, I think, is that the peace was sudden, unexpected. I remember as recently as 2009, nobody looked forward happily to a peace agreement coming as soon as it did. And of course, as Stephen intimated, at the time of the peace agreement, and this to some extent was the one benefit of the years of conflict, that at a time when places like Eastern Ecuador, the Oriente of Ecuador, had made choices whereby the extraction of oil, the deforestation, the colonization has transformed Eastern Ecuador. Because of the conflict, much of Colombia remained off limits for industrial development. So the good news is that Colombia now is posed to be able to make decisions about the fate of its natural landscape, which is the very essence of the national soul of the country, informed by 50 years of understanding of the scientific importance of biodiversity, the importance of the Amazon to global climate, that simply was not accessible to the Ecuadorians, for example, when they made those fateful decisions many years ago. But of course, everything hangs in the balance. And Mamo, a very close friend of mine from the Arahuacos, Mamo Camillo, once said to me, la paz no vale nada si es solamente una manera en que los varios lados pueden unificarse para mantener una guerra contra la naturaleza. Lo que tenemos que hacer paz con todo el mundo. And what he was saying, of course, is that peace won't matter if it's just an excuse for the three sides of the conflict to come together to continue to create a war against nature. And so the everything, in a sense, hangs in the balance. As peace came to the country, the federal state was not prepared. It didn't have the capacity to move into these areas that were now vacated by the FARC. Into that void moved dissident FARC. Into that void moved members of the various fragmented groups of the original cartels. And these elements had no interest in the civil society. They had no interest in the civic leaders lifting their heads to demand the implementation of the peace agreement, all the elements of which were largely about the very social development that the FARC had been calling for all of those years. So into the void came an assemblage of individuals who were very happy to begin to shoot and kill civic leaders that emerged. And so I think there was a kind of a perfect storm of disinterest from the new administration, economic pressure from forces beyond Colombia's control, and a fundamental incapacity to implement in a timely way the conditions of the peace. I think that had you had Santos, for example, with the prestige of the Nobel Prize, in office for even just another couple of years, Colombia could have gone to the world global community and said, you owe us. It's your consumption of cocaine that has led to our rivers being the slurries of the shapeless dead. You're the ones, and we demand morally your support. And I think Colombia could have gotten that financial support. After all, if the Americans were prepared to spend what they spent on Plan Colombia, why not spend that kind of money for actual peace? And so I think this is why peace is precarious in Colombia. This is why things hang in the balance, but I have tremendous optimism that things will never go back to how they were. You know, when these conflicts, be they in Ireland or South Africa, or these fratricidal, horrific national spasms of bloodshed, generally what brings them to an end is when the people themselves say bastante, enough. We will not let this happen. And I think Colombia has the remarkable capacity, unlike any other country that I know, to overcome the immediate challenges. But again, it all comes down to one thing: cocaine, the venom of the war. As long as we tolerate cocaine, there will never be tranquility and full peace in Colombia. There is one simple solution that we could, with a single stroke of a cleansing pen, is to legalize cocaine, create a nutraceutical market for coca, for the campesinos who are going to grow coca, because nothing else can possibly match its value. And so why, I ask, should the people of Colombia allow their biodiversity to be put at risk with aerial spraying of poisons that also threaten the well-being of their children, just to satisfy the needs of a distant government whose people are under the illusion that they can satisfy their disappointments and loneliness with the use of an anesthetic drug best used to help your dentist pull your teeth? It is time that those who use cocaine should bear the price of using cocaine, and countries like Colombia should be freed to market leaves as they've always been known to the Inca, as a divine leaf of immortality, reclaiming the coca plant, a child of Colombia, as a symbol of patrimony, a point of pride, one of the most incredible medicinal and healing plants known to botanists around the world. So I think that is the great hope, the power and the spirit of the Colombian people. And it's to that that I've chosen to dedicate most of my efforts in my last years of my professional life.
Thank you very much, Wade, for that panoramic overview of Colombia's recent history of wars, of connections with the drug trade, of course, but also of the counterpoints, color y cariño, and biodiversity and its protection, and so on, and of situating the peace processes in that extremely complex Colombian context. And reminding us of setting the stage to help us understand both the promise, the opportunities offered by the peace process, but also the controversies it has generated and the immense challenges faced by not only the state, the current government of President Duque, but by other stakeholders in trying to realize this potential. So we'll now take this to a different level by passing the virtual mic and the screen to Paola Jimenez, who will, in a sense, take us to a more local level view from women's organizations and other activists and their more bottom-up perspective, if you will, on the current crisis. Paola, it's all yours. So sorry, I should say that Paola, I may be presenting in Spanish, but her slides will be in English. So for those who are not fluent in Spanish, there's a lot of information on the slides, so follow along with us, and then we'll have a multilingual dialogue at the end.
Okay, thank you. So, good afternoon to all. My name is Paola Jimenez, and today I'm going to be talking about collective reparations from a gender perspective. I want to thank you for inviting me to join this panel, but unfortunately my English is not good enough, so I'm going to speak in Spanish. Entonces, la presentación tiene tres grandes partes, tres grandes bloques. En el primero, siguiente, por favor, en el primero vamos a revisar un poco las características generales de este programa de reparación colectiva. En segundo lugar, vamos a revisar algunos aspectos que de alguna manera ayudan a entender la dimensión de los retos que tiene el Estado colombiano para lograr una reparación realmente transformadora desde el punto de vista de la igualdad de género. Y en el tercer punto voy a presentarles algunas de las críticas o de los puntos críticos que las organizaciones de mujeres han identificado en estos procesos de reparación colectiva. Entonces, para empezar, decirles que la reparación colectiva en Colombia tiene su primer origen en el proceso de negociación del gobierno Álvaro Uribe Vélez con las Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia. Ese proceso tuvo, digamos, un soporte legal que fue la Ley de Justicia y Paz, conocida como la Ley de Justicia y Paz del año 2005, y en esta ley fue la primera definición que se le hizo a la reparación colectiva. Esta definición se fue enriqueciendo siguiente, y se configuró lo que tenemos hoy como reparación colectiva en Colombia, que es básicamente un programa del nivel nacional que es ejecutado por una instancia nacional a partir de una ley que sale en el año 2011, que es la ley de víctimas, y básicamente pues es una serie de medidas que se orientan a resarcir los daños que sufrieron las organizaciones, colectivos sociales y políticos y las comunidades en el marco del conflicto armado. Entonces, desde el 2011 se creó, digamos, esta figura del Programa Nacional de Reparación Colectiva, y a partir de ahí pues ha habido algunas reglamentaciones posteriores de la ley que tienen que ver mucho, y como lo vamos a ver más adelante, con la creación de una ruta étnica específica tanto para pueblos indígenas como para pueblos afrocolombianos. Ahora sí, siguiente. Para imaginarnos un poco qué es un plan de reparación colectiva, hay como tres grandes dimensiones o tipos de medidas que tiene un plan de reparación. Una son las materiales como tal, que son los bienes y servicios que se destinan, digamos, a reparar el daño de reconstrucción de la infraestructura de las organizaciones, reconstrucción de infraestructura comunitaria. Hay otra dimensión que es la dimensión simbólica, que no se trata de reparar lo que se perdió, sino reparar lo que eso significaba para las organizaciones. Eso implica, digamos, un proceso de reflexión de ellas para poder entender qué fue lo que pasó y simbolizarlo. Y también está una dimensión política, un tipo de medidas políticas en las que básicamente se busca que el Estado garantice la existencia de estos grupos y asociaciones políticas y sociales. Siguiente, por favor. En cuanto a los enfoques principales, hay dos enfoques que son fundamentales, que son el enfoque diferencial y el enfoque transformador, pero esos los voy a abordar en la siguiente parte. Siguiente. En cuanto a los avances del proceso, básicamente lo que muestran las cifras, y aquí voy a citar el informe que hicieron los órganos de control en Colombia al Congreso de la República sobre el avance del programa, pues digamos los avances no han sido los esperados. Hoy en Colombia se reconocen 755 sujetos de reparación colectiva, y de esos el 71% están en las primeras fases del proceso, que son diagnóstico del daño y demás, y apenas el 29% han logrado llegar al diseño e implementación de los planes de reparación colectiva. Según ese informe, solamente 16 sujetos colectivos han terminado su proceso de reparación colectiva. Siguiente. En términos de ejemplos, pues hay 4 grandes tipos de actores o de sujetos de estas reparaciones colectivas. Yo aquí en la slide puse 4 ejemplos que tal vez podríamos profundizar a través de las preguntas, porque el tiempo no me permite profundizar, pero básicamente son 4 tipos. Uno, los sujetos a nivel nacional, que aquí encontramos periodistas, sindicalistas, diputados, concejales, partidos políticos, organizaciones de derechos humanos que han sido reconocidas dentro de un proceso a nivel nacional. Hay otro tipo de actores que son más a nivel territorial y en el que se ha pretendido, digamos, reparar a comunidades, y eso se ha expresado en que corregimientos, inclusive municipios completos, son reconocidos como sujetos de reparación colectiva. Y desde el punto de vista diferencial también hay organizaciones de mujeres que están pasando por este proceso, y comunidades indígenas. Siguiente. Entonces, un poco para ver estos aspectos generales que de alguna manera muestran la dimensión del reto que tiene Colombia en este sentido. El primero tiene que ver con 2 categorías que son muy importantes para entender cuál es la condición jurídica y política de las mujeres en el contexto de la justicia transicional. Esas son 2 categorías que son absolutamente interdependientes, que no pueden ser escindidas y que han venido, digamos, construyendo y consolidando con el tiempo. Eso tiene mucho que ver con el hecho de que la justicia transicional en Colombia esté parada o que esté fundamentada en 2 procesos de paz o en 2 procesos de negociación que fueron totalmente disímiles de muchas maneras, pero específicamente desde el punto de vista de la igualdad de género. Pasamos de un proceso de negociación con las ACL que el tema de género fue precario, existente, a un proceso de negociación con las FARC y un acuerdo de paz que es paradigmático en términos de género en muchos sentidos. La creación de una comisión de género en la que fueron representantes del gobierno, representantes de las guerrillas, un número muy importante de medidas afirmativas dentro del acuerdo, una serie de medidas dentro del acuerdo que están siendo seguidas a través de 51 indicadores. O sea, digamos, pasamos de un acuerdo muy tímido a un acuerdo muy paradigmático. Y esto último se logró gracias a que las mujeres estuvieron ahí haciendo la incidencia para participar directamente y para que los temas de género quedaran ahí en el acuerdo. Y de alguna manera, pues, es en esa evolución que llegamos a estas dos categorías que son tan importantes. Una, la de las mujeres como víctimas, pero también sujetos, perdón, como víctimas y sujetos de especial protección, pero también las mujeres como agentes políticos, que incluso fueron victimizadas por ese ejercicio de activismo social, político, humanitario, y que hoy es indudable que tienen un papel fundamental en la construcción de una paz estable y duradera. Estas son las dos dimensiones desde las cuales las mujeres hacen las críticas y abordan los temas de justicia transicional. Siguiente. Un segundo aspecto importante es que en Colombia ha habido jurídicamente, no necesariamente institucionalmente ni en la aprobación de los programas, pero jurídicamente sí existe un marco muy robusto en términos de incorporar el enfoque de género y incorporar un enfoque étnico. No voy a entrar, digamos, en las fuentes de cómo esto se fue configurando, pero digamos, hay un proceso que tiene un momento importante en el acuerdo con las FARC, porque este acuerdo demanda que haya un fortalecimiento de las reparaciones colectivas, pero básicamente, digamos, en Colombia hoy jurídicamente está claro cuáles han sido las violaciones específicas que han sufrido las mujeres, los pueblos indígenas, los pueblos afro en el marco del conflicto armado, y unos estándares generales que deberían guiar el proceso sobre cómo repararlos. Y creo que eso es algo muy particular, no necesariamente algo que se está viendo operativizado, pero que sí existe en términos de referentes. Yo no, por el tiempo no los voy a poder abordar, simplemente si nos podemos devolver al primero. Perfecto. Simplemente voy a hacer referencia a uno de ellos, el resto los van a tener ustedes ahí en el PowerPoint. Y es cómo estos estándares legales, etcétera, llaman a que debe haber una coordinación entre el Estado colombiano y las autoridades indígenas, pero que eso no puede obstar para la participación de las mujeres. Se establece que se debe reconocer aspectos o fenómenos como la subordinación de las mujeres, respetando al gobierno propio, respetando a las autoridades propias, pero que debe haber como un reconocimiento en ese sentido. Y así como pues hay otros estándares que son muy importantes, pero que básicamente hacen eso, que el marco jurídico en términos de incorporación del enfoque de género y étnico sea bastante robusto, tanto para reparación colectiva como para otras figuras de justicia transicional. Y el tercer aspecto tiene que ver con el profundo vínculo que genera, la siguiente, por favor, que se genera entre la agenda, la siguiente, entre la agenda de derechos humanos, justicia transicional, víctimas, con la agenda de género y desarrollo. Para entender que existe una reparación realmente transformadora desde el punto de vista de género, hay que reconocer al menos 4 elementos. Uno, que se reconozcan las condiciones previas de desigualdad, violencia y subordinación de género que eran anteriores al hecho victimizante. Segundo, reconocer que cómo esas condiciones previas determinan las afectaciones que viven las personas por el conflicto, identificar las afectaciones diferenciales y definir medidas que realmente reparen el daño, pero además contribuyan a transformar esos aspectos estructurales. Entonces, de estos 4 puntos de vista es que han empezado a aparecer medidas dentro de los planes de reparación colectiva a organizaciones de mujeres que hablan, por ejemplo, del tema de acceso a la tierra, del restablecimiento de proyectos colectivos, del problema de autonomía económica de las mujeres, el tema de la distribución de las tareas de cuidado y demás, que si ustedes se dan cuenta son muy propias de la agenda de género y desarrollo. Y entonces aquí entran a jugar en el escenario, pues, los retrasos y las dificultades que ha tenido también el Estado colombiano para avanzar en esa agenda de género y desarrollo, los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y específicamente lo de ODS5, Y creo que eso también, digamos, complejiza bastante ese escenario en que realmente el Estado colombiano pueda lograr una reparación transformadora. Esos serían como los 3 elementos muy en general. Siguiente, siguiente y siguiente. Esta tercera parte la quisiera dedicar a contarles a ustedes cuáles son las críticas o los puntos críticos que las organizaciones de mujeres han venido identificando en los programas de reparación colectiva. Entonces, para eso elaboré algunas frases que no son textuales, no estoy citando a nadie, pero sí tratan como un poco de recoger las ideas que las mujeres han expresado en varios informes. Varios de informes, esos informes están al final de la presentación, les pueden hacer clic para ir a los informes. Yo lo que hice fue como resaltar algunas frases para mostrarles qué es lo que las mujeres piensan y reclaman frente a este contexto de reparaciones colectivas. Y para eso, pues voy a utilizar categorías muy básico que han venido utilizando las organizaciones de mujeres que le están haciendo el seguimiento con enfoque de género al proceso de paz con las FARC. Hablamos de distribución económica o redistribución económica, y es que tanto en estos programas y cómo se están asumiendo las desigualdades previas, como las veíamos hace un momento, en términos económicos, sociales y demás. El reconocimiento cultural, que tiene que ver mucho con todos estos patrones, estereotipos que ponen a la mujer en un lugar subordinado o en desventaja, ponen a lo femenino. Y tercero, pues la participación política, que tanto en estos procesos se está logrando una participación de las mujeres en pie de igualdad. Entonces, frente a eso, como les digo, lo que hice fue agrupar algunas frases que me parece que espero que puedan ser dicientes respecto de lo que dicen las mujeres. Las voy a leer. Entonces, la primera frase es: a las mujeres nos das más poquito porque piensan que no vamos a pedir tanto. La segunda frase. A mi mamá le gustaba mucho la cría de pollos y preparar alimentos. A nosotras no. Quisiéramos producir cacao que sí deja plata. Tercera frase. Yo no tuve tiempo para ir a las reuniones a explicarles que yo nunca tengo tiempo. Cuarto. Construimos nuestro plan de reparación colectiva, pero no se está respetando los acuerdos y los tiempos. Quinto, me alegra que nos hayan dado ingreso preferencial a la universidad. Qué lástima que yo igual no cumplo con los requisitos. Sexto, pero no se supone que igual el Estado colombiano tenía que construirnos ese acueducto. Séptimo, somos expertas en hacer diagnóstico de daños y acompañamiento psicosocial. Sin embargo, contrataron a un tercero para hacer ese trabajo por nosotros. Entonces, en este grupo, básicamente, vemos que las mujeres hacen críticas desde lo que se ve como el posicionamiento subordinado de las mujeres en las dinámicas locales de desarrollo. También hablan sobre la sobrecarga de trabajo, de cuidado que les impide participar en estos espacios. También hablan cómo se crean medidas afirmativas, pero para el colectivo, pero estas medidas afirmativas no tienen en cuenta las necesidades de las mujeres. El segundo grupo de frases tienen que ver con este reconocimiento cultural y que yo parafraseo de la siguiente manera. Como dirían las mujeres en este caso. Primera frase. Nos dimos cuenta que éramos víctimas después que terminaron los actos de reparación. Segundo, nos ha parecido muy bueno el centro de salud que construyeron en el municipio, pero todavía yo no entendí por qué fui víctima de violencia sexual. 3, disculpe, no hablo español. 4, sí fuimos, pero se nos fue el tiempo de repartir los refrigerios y hacer las actas de las reuniones. 5, muchas personas sabían lo que me pasó a mí y a muchas otras, pero de eso nunca se habló. Tal vez es porque se trata de un asunto que solo nos afectó a cada una de nosotros. 6, me hubiera gustado hablar del daño que nos han hecho la presencia de actores armados en nuestro territorio y la pérdida de nuestra cultura. Nunca me preguntaron sobre eso. Y 7, todavía hay quien justifica lo que nos pasó por estar haciendo cosas que no nos corresponden, cosas de otros. Y finalmente, en el grupo de puntos críticos de participación, voy a leer muy rápidamente las frases, un poco que muestran los déficits que hay en participación de las mujeres desde el punto de vista cuantitativo y cualitativo. Primera frase, no sabíamos que podíamos ir y tampoco nos invitaron. Segunda frase, Fuimos, pero no nos sentimos en confianza de hablar de nuestros temas y preocupaciones. Tercero, fuimos, pero fuimos una inmensa minoría. Cuarto, nos invitan a tantos espacios que ya no entendemos muy bien en qué estamos participando. Quinto, cuando hablamos de nuestros derechos, como mujeres, los funcionarios públicos no saben de qué estamos hablando o no quieren saber. Sexto, logramos estar, pero tuvimos que pelear por ello. Séptimo, le apostamos al acuerdo final de paz, pero no queremos poner en riesgo nuestras dinámicas organizativas. Octavo, a veces nos parece que le estamos dedicando más tiempo a las reuniones de plan de reparación colectiva que a nuestros propios objetivos como organización. Y noveno, están convocando a gente que no nos representa. Entonces, para terminar muy rápidamente, 5 ideas fuerza de esta presentación. El primero es que Colombia tiene un marco institucional jurídico, más que institucional, un marco jurídico innovador, fuerte para los temas de incorporar el tema de género y étnico. Segundo, que ya en la operación el programa está enfrentando, digamos, retos importantes. Tercero, muy importante, que hay un movimiento social de mujeres fuerte, maduro, capacidad de hacer propuestas técnicas, hacerle seguimiento, y que es importante también hacer este vínculo entre la agenda de justicia transicional y derechos humanos con la agenda de género y desarrollo. Muchas gracias y perdón si me pasé un poco del tiempo.
Thank you very much, Paola, for this fascinating comparison of the 2005 Accords and the law on reparations and compared to the 2016 Accords and the framework for collective reparations and the different gender dimensions of both legal frameworks, if you will. Your comments on how, particularly with the 2016 Accord, there being significant juridical advances with regards to incorporating women as less as victims, or not just as victims, and equally as agents of change is quite important. It's very notable. Thanks so much for the rich testimonies from a diversity of women in very different communities that indicate also how difficult it is to realize this potential that exists on paper, that is recognized on paper, the difficulty in practice. So we'll come back to that, I'm sure, to those tensions throughout the Q's and A's. But I'd like to pass it on to Professor Nelson Ovalle Diaz to now take us a little bit deeper into the workings of the special jurisdiction, which is another innovation of the 2016 Accords that has its roots in the 2005 Accord, of course, but has been taken to a new level. And I think there too, we'll find this tension between what is the potential unleashed by the Accords or opened up, and then the extreme enormous difficulties to actually putting that potential into practice. So Nelson, last but not least, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and all the participants to this panel. I am very happy to present today the special jurisdiction of peace in Colombia and his treatment of exemplary cases. I want to make the link between the special jurisdiction of peace in Colombia and the model of transitional justice. That is the main issue here. There's a theoretical perspective. The special jurisdiction of Colombia is a transitional justice model that is complemented with a truth commission that is working beside the special jurisdiction of peace. And what is transitional justice? Transitional justice is a judicial and non-judicial mechanism that make criminal law apply to those responsible for international crime more flexible to put end to internal armed conflict. That is the idea. And there are 4 elements in transitional justice: transformation of society toward peace and democracy, flexibility of criminal law, temporary application of special rules, and a wider scope of political actions after a peace agreement. And the transitional justice model apply as implementation of peace agreement. That is the situation in the case of Colombia after 2016. If we take in consideration the transitional justice, the first element is transformation. Transformation is the idea that the peace agreement will transform a society more democratic, more inclusive, and other elements. And in this case, we had only get one important outcome after the peace agreement, was the outcome that the first EP give out the arms to the delegation of the Security Council. That means the former FAR EP are now a political organization and no more a army group, unless for the majority of them that they accept to become a member of the civil society. But the other elements of the transformation are not yet in place after the peace agreement. The second element of transitional justice, that is the model of the special jurisdiction of peace in Colombia, is the flexibility. The idea that the criminal code and the other rules of criminal law doesn't apply to the members of army group that participate in the conflict, and is in a state of the criminal code and other regular rules. The participants in the conflict will get a more flexible system of law that allow them to accept the deal, to accept to give out the weapons and become civil citizens. And that is one of the elements that is common in transitional justice and is common in the special jurisdiction of peace in Colombia. The other element is the temporary measures. That means in a transitional justice, as is the case of Colombia, is no permanent system, is only a provisional system. The special jurisdiction of peace is has a provisional duration, 10 years to start the investigation procedures, 5 additional years to complete judgments, and the possibility of 5 years more. At the end, maximum 20 years could be the possibility of duration for the special jurisdiction of peace. In the case of Truth Commission, has only 3 years mandate, which finished this November 2021. The Truth Commission are working very hard right now because it's not easy, taking in consideration the restrictions because COVID-19, and they are doing these virtual meetings with victims, with many people. We are working right now here. They are working by themselves, try to understand how the conflict happens, and they use a territorial model. That means they divide the country in 26 regions and try to understand in which region what happened in each area of Colombia where the conflict was more stronger at the time. The last element of transitional justice is wider scope. That means the special jurisdiction of peace has integrate a very wider system of justice that is not only justice, it's more than justice, is the idea of reparation, no repetition, and try to have the mandate with the Truth Commission to reconstruct the social body, and in order to make a real new becoming for the member of the society. Doesn't matter if they before was in opposite side. After the peace agreement, the idea is that this transitional justice allowed them to become together again. That is, in general, the presentation about the theoretical approach. Now we are necessary to go to the numbers. What are happening in reality with the special jurisdiction of peace? They are some numbers, for example, we had that the majority of people who are submitted to the special jurisdiction of peace are members of the FAR, former FAR. We had 9,747 as members of FAR who are now submitted to the jurisdiction of the special jurisdiction of peace. They represent 76.5% of the people submitted to this jurisdiction. The second group are the public force. That means the member of the army, the member of the National Police of Colombia. We had 2,900 members of the state forces that represent 22.3% that are submitted to the special jurisdiction of peace. And we had the third group of people are state agents. That means public servants. That is the idea. They are no member of the military, but they are member of the public authorities, and they are 134 members of the representative of the state that are now submitted to the special jurisdiction of peace. And we had the lower, smaller group is the social protesters. That is a special circumstances because during the conflict, and it's still happen now, they are the phenomenon of criminalization of protesters. And some protesters are taking this way to avoid the ordinary jurisdiction and take the special jurisdiction of peace in order to clean the situation and say, and this protester happened in the context of the army conflict, and this is a small group, only 12 people, and represent only 0.1% of the cases. The idea here is that they are almost or more than 12,000 people that are submitted, 12,843 people submitted to the special jurisdiction of peace. This is a very huge number. It's not possible to proceed with 12,843 people in an individual process. That means it's necessary to use the microprocess model. That means the special jurisdiction of peace are not investigating one by one, are investigating by micro cases. In the micro cases, the special jurisdiction of peace organized until now 7 macro cases, and there are other cases that are not in this list, are beside this list, but there are 7 micro cases. That means the special jurisdiction of peace tried to put this 12,000 people submitted to the jurisdiction in a specific micro cases, but there are another element that we need to understand, that is that they are some members of the special jurisdiction of peace give as some member of FARC the amnesty auction when the member are were in the lower level of the organization, and only the higher member of SFAR are submitted for the full process in the special jurisdiction of peace, and they must to be before the accusations for the high criminality. In this case, we had the special jurisdiction of peace select 7 macro cases that is in order to represent the bigger international crimes, and they are the case number 1 is hostage taking and other serious deprivation of liberty committed by the FARC. This first case is only target the FARC of FARC members, and but that is a specific case, but they are a case target a specific agent of the state, is the case number 03. Death illegitimately presented as a combat casualties by the state agents. That means we have two big cases, the case 1 and the case 3. The case 1 is target specific the FARC members and the higher commanders of the FARC, and the case 3 are targeted the members of the army and the other representative of the state. Then they kill illegitimately some people presented as a combative casualties, but was not the case. In the Spanish languages, we say falsos positivos. The case number 3 is the case of falsos positivos, and they are maybe the more important cases that are happening until now. There are other cases that they regional approach is, for example, the case number 2. Prioritize the territorial situation in Ricaurte, Tumaco, and Barbacoas, Nariño. Is in the border with Ecuador area. That is a territorial case. There are other territorial case, the case number 4. The territorial situation in Urabá region is the region where they are the growing of banana production and other agricultural products that are very important in the region, and it's a case, territorial case. The case number 5 is the same situation. Prioritize the territorial situation in the northern region of Cauca and southern Valle de Cauca. This is a particular region where they are a combination of many ethnic groups, African, Colombian, Aboriginal people, and in conflict with sugar cane producers and other social issues that are very deep in Colombia history and still going. And in this area, the conflict is still happen today. For example, we had the situations in the last days in the Cauca region that is not yet in peace. The case number 6 is victimization of members of the Patriot Union. Patriot Union was a political party that was disappeared by the state agents, and they are more than 8,000 members of this political party that are affected, and it's a specific case. And this same case is now before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. That means we had the same case, the case of Patriot Union, now in the special jurisdiction of peace regarding the implementation of the peace agreement, but the same case is now before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and maybe the outcome could be similar. And the last case is recruitment and use of guilt and voice in the army conflict. This is the last macro case. I don't have the time to explain the details of its case. However, I will only talk a little about 3 cases. The case targeting the FARC leaders, because they are 51 suspect high level FARC members that are targeting by the case of hostage taking and other serious deprivation of liberty committed by the FARC. In general, they are 21,396 victims of this kind of crime committed by the former members of the FARC. And we have the first indictment. Until now, the special jurisdiction of peace has adopted only 1 indictment. 3 years later, it's a little slow, but if we compare with the International Criminal Court, it's like the same speed. It's not too fast, it's not too slow. If we compare to the international standards, if we compare with the Rwanda Tribunal or Yugoslavia Tribunal, adopt the first indictment 3 years late is in the average of international in transitional justice system. It's not, for some people it's too slow, but for expert working in the file, this is the average to adopt the first indictment, and we believe that there are other indictments coming in the other cases. The case that is very controversial in Colombia is the number 3. death illegitimately presented as a combat casualties by the state agents, because it's the case of in Colombia, all people know falsos positivos, and the main issue is because we had 6,402 victims. That means people who were killed, but was no combatants, what civil people, but even being civil people, the army forces present them as a combatants, and that was not true. And that is a very huge crime, because 6,000 is the double of number that Pinochet forces killed in the Pinochet time, in the Pinochet in Chile. The Pinochet killed more than 3,000 people at the time, but in the Colombia army conflict, the army of Colombia killed more than 6,000. That is higher number than the case of the Chile. That is a controversial case, and they are 352 members of the army now submitted to the special jurisdiction of peace. They are other members of the army that are not here, but that is the number until now. And because my time is running, I want to go to the last case, recruitment and use of gear and boys in the army conflict. This is a particular case. These numbers are not exactly. We had 17,024 number of victimizing events. That means situations where the groups recruit girls and boys. But my concern is that this situation is still happening right now. Even after the peace agreement, the dissident of FARC and other army groups are still recruiting girls and boys in order to incorporate them in army groups. And that allowed me to go to the conclusions. As a conclusions, I don't have the time to explain deep why this is the conclusions, but I had Colombian survivors are getting more truth instead of justice. That is my first lecture of the implementation of the special jurisdiction of peace in Colombia. We know more now than before of the peace agreement. The citizens know a lot of what happened, things that they were not able to know before. That was the more important contribution until now of the special jurisdiction of peace and the contribution of the Truth Commission, because we had more truth, but we don't have necessary justice until now. However, stable peace is far to begin. That is the other problem, because in many regions in Colombia, the peace arrived for a very short time, but in reality now, for example, Argelia, Cauca today, they are in trouble, in big trouble, because this internal army conflict. The main cause of the conflict, inequity, is still growing even after the 2016 peace agreement. Between they are data coming from the statistic of Colombia, DANE, that show that the inequity is still growing even after the peace agreement and before COVID. And because COVID, we had a new situation. The pandemic of COVID-19 is a new challenge that highlights the inequality as the main problem of Colombians. That is, this problem of inequality is coming before COVID, and now with COVID is only more evident that there are a huge problem about inequality in Colombia. Colombia is between the 10 in the top 10 countries with more inequality problems. If we take the Gini coefficient, we can understand the level of inequality in Colombia. And now the COVID is increasing this inequality situation. That means that the main concern for new violence in Colombia is the lack of opportunities for the new generations. Very important. 1 out of 3 jobs in Colombia does not have any job or study opportunity, and the criminal organizations are ready to recruit them, and that I made the link with the case number 7. The case number 7 is recruitment of youth and girls and boys in the army conflict. And we, as we say in the theoretical first part, one of the goals of transitional justice is no repetition. No repetition, but we had that is not happen because now the criminal organization is still recruiting girls and boys in order to incorporate them in army groups, and that is happening right now. And the Colombian army are targeting these groups, and they are killing children. In the army of Colombia are killing children that the army groups recruit. That means for them, the conflict is not over. For them, the conflict is still as before the peace agreement. Thank you very much, and I hope to go deeper in the question period.
Thank you very much, Nelson, for this rigorous overview of the special jurisdiction and how it complements the Truth Commission. Thanks for taking us through the overall docket of cases that are being considered by the special jurisdiction, and then bringing us down to actually look at a few of those exemplary cases and what conflict dynamics they've been tied to. And thanks finally for your closing thoughts on this paradox of there being more truth and justice, certainly so far through these mechanisms, and leaving us with the big challenge of ongoing grave social and economic inequalities, in fact, driving a resurgence or a perpetuation of violence. So this ties into some of the questions that have been posed in the chat. And so with this, I will turn the microphone over to my colleague, Kimberly Inksader of the Just Governance Group to moderate the Q&A session. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And thank you, Wade and Paola and Nelson, all very interesting presentations, and they've triggered some interesting questions too that we can follow up on. We have maybe not quite as much time as we'd hoped for questions, but I wanted to ask Wade if he could respond to one, and it's from a Carleton professor who studies conflict, and he was questioning whether cocaine is like a driving force, a root cause, and is that the focus that we need to have, or are there more structural factors in the political system, economic, etc., that even predate the introduction of cocaine and drug trafficking as an aggravating factor?
Well, I think
you wanted to respond to that.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I wanted to thank Nelson and Paola. I love their presentations. I think the most powerful statistic that we've heard today is what Nelson just said, that 30% of young people have neither study opportunities nor employment opportunities. So obviously, to the question from the professor from Carleton, by no means am I suggesting that cocaine is the sole problem of instability within Colombia. Obviously, a country that ranks in the top 10 in terms of overall inequity. Remember that, of course, Bolivia, for example, had fundamental land reform in 1952, Peru in 1965, for better or for worse. And Colombia's never really had a sustained sort of a process of land reform. And the inequities that Nelson spoke about really go hand in hand with the conundrum of the cocaine trade. When you have young people who are unemployed with few opportunities, the attraction of any illicit criminal activity becomes all that is the only game in town, if you will. I think that the point of focusing on the cocaine is that it's difficult, I think, for people outside of the world of Colombia to see the extent of the damage of that trade, the scale of it, the overwhelming consequences of that trade. I mean, I think it's really quite clear that the fuel of the fire of war that has maintained the conflict for 50 years. I mean, obviously, long before there was a struggle with cocaine in a major commercial illicit sense. I mean, Colombia went through La Violencia. I mean, Colombia went through the War of 1,000 Days. I mean, Colombia, since the time of independence, has been a nation. You know, in a way, if geography is destiny, one of the challenges of Colombia has always been the weakness of the federal state, in good measure because of the complexity of the topographical landscape of Colombia, arguably the most geographically challenging place on earth. And that gave rise to local power structures, often at the head of which were individuals who are quite prepared to exploit the reciprocity of hatred that goes right back to the time of the conflict between Bolivar and Santander, in which you had, coming out of the revolution, or even before the revolution, you know, you had a kind of one side of the revolution inspired by dreams of the Enlightenment, and another side of established gentry whose main goal was simply to replace the Spaniards with themselves at the head of an oligarchy dominated by the influence of the church. And so those two halves of the Colombian reality go deep in the history of the country. A more progressive party hue with the hue of red, and a more resistant or a conventional party, the blue side of things. And so obviously there's been this tension. I mean, the number of conflicts that raged throughout the 19th century, some of them almost laughable in their origins, had not the consequences been so desperate, including the War of 1,000 Days. But the presence of the cocaine money, without doubt, added a level of intensity and violence that simply would not have been there without the cocaine.
Wade, can I ask you to maybe respond to a linked question, and then I'm going to go to Paola and Nelson with some particular questions. Another attendee asked if the 2016 Accord is dealing with some of the regional discrepancies and the inequalities that you mentioned and that Nelson.
Well, I think Nelson and Paola would more. One thing I just really liked about what Paola said is that, again, my experience is I'm a storyteller, I'm a writer, I just traveled through the region. But the one consistent thing I saw was that the strength and promise of peace lay with the women. And Paola, I have to get you a copy of my new book, Magdalena, Historias de Colombia, when it comes out in Spanish with Planeta, because I profile two women, one in Puerto Triunfo and another in La Dorada, who came from San Diego, women who may be known to you, and the strength of these women and what they endured, and the hope of Colombia lies in the women. I absolutely believe that. And Kimberly, what was I'm getting too old.
No, well, someone asked, because I asked if the 2016
yes, no, I know.
Accord.
No, what you were saying. I'm again, you know, one of the things that I find wonderful to be with Nelson and Paola is that, you know, I can give you this overview of the nation from the almost a poetic sense of a storyteller. But when we get into the details that Paola and Nelson shared with us, you see how bloody complicated it is, right? How incredibly difficult it is. And so, for example, I'm no authority in the peace agreement of 2016, but the very fact that there were 578 clauses, many of them were all about progressive aims of the FARC. You know, I mean, nobody's untainted in civil war, and certainly the FARC lost their credibility through their actions. But at the same time, the leftist movement began with the dream of a better world. And when you look at what the FARC, at least on paper, were calling for, it's what the people want. They want economic opportunities. They want infrastructure. They want potable water. They want good schools. They want to access, you know, and they don't want to live their lives waiting for their children to go off to the cities, where the only place where they can scratch a living on the edges of a cash economy. So these 578 clauses of the agreement, which had this incredible price tag of $45 billion, you know, those clauses were all about the development of infrastructure in the rural areas. And again, it's that economic development that stands in the face of violence, stands in the face of the cartels and so on. From what I got from Nelson, you cannot have one without the other.
Right. Thank you, Wade. I wanted to ask Paola a quick question, and there's a group of questions for Nelson. So Paola, I wanted, you know, what some of the first comments were about the murders of social leaders. And I wonder if you could address that, the risks that are taken by those who, for example, seek land restitution or these collective reparations. There was also a comment on the youth being killed. So I wonder if you had any comment on that.
So, en las preguntas, digamos, hay dos temas en los que pues aprovecharía para profundizar. Uno tiene que ver con el tema de la seguridad de los líderes. Y digamos, en mi presentación, la última slide, en esta libertad que yo me tomé de parafrasear lo que podrían estar diciendo las mujeres en estos de críticas o de puntos críticos del tema de justicia transicional, pues la frase es nos están matando, digamos que es una frase que se está utilizando lamentablemente de manera muy reiterativa desde los líderes sociales, y es que pues existen en este momento pocas garantías de ejercicio de liderazgo social y político en Colombia. Colombia tiene este lugar muy vergonzoso de ser el país de América Latina que más tiene líderes asesinados y defensores de derechos humanos, y esto, digamos, es uno de los digamos, de los temas más importantes para evaluar lo que está pasando hoy con la justicia transicional y con las reparaciones colectivas, etcétera. Pero también quería aprovechar para hacer un poco también la reflexión sobre lo que se podrían entender como las causas estructurales del conflicto, ¿no? Sí, que es un poco también la pregunta que se le hacía a Wade. Y yo creo que, digamos, aquí también es interesante verlo desde el enfoque de género, porque los informes que hicieron las mujeres sobre el conflicto armado y muchas expertas sobre estos temas de género y conflicto armado siempre plantearon que existía como una especie de continuo de violencias, ¿no? Que las violencias que vivían las mujeres o que estructurales que vivían las mujeres, las condiciones de discriminación, las condiciones de violencias, etcétera, representan un continuum que vino a ser exacerbado por el conflicto armado, pero que ya existía, o sea, había ya unas causas estructurales. Y cuando hablamos de represión de colectivos, para el caso de lo que estaba hablando yo hoy, digamos, también tiene mucho que ver el lugar que las mujeres tenían dentro de sus propias organizaciones políticas y sociales, la forma en que se vieron victimizadas. Entonces, claro, digamos, creo que desde el enfoque de género es muy interesante cómo nos hace ver eso, ¿no? Que sí hay unas causas estructurales y que el conflicto lo que hizo fue ensañarse contra las mujeres, contra grupos indígenas, contra los grupos afrocolombianos, pero porque existían esas formas de discriminación y de violencia también estructurales. Y ya que pues me ha dado la libertad de citar, en este caso sí voy a hacer una cita explícita de una mujer que escuché en un evento de reparaciones colectivas hace unos años y que expresaba este continuum de violencias así. Esta sí es una cita textual. Ella decía: la mayoría éramos jóvenes, éramos las mandaderas, no tomábamos las decisiones, todas pertenecíamos a otras organizaciones, pero en cargos subalternos. Éramos las putas, las abandonahijos, las vagabundas. Si se hubiera visibilizado nuestro aporte, las cosas serían distintas. Entonces creo que ahí es una frase muy elocuente de cómo existe este continuum de violencias y cómo también ahí encontramos causas estructurales del conflicto sin lugar a dudas.
Thank you, Paula. That, I think the complex, I guess, roots and all these aggravating factors of violence in Colombia is precisely the reason it's been decades long, and that at least the 2016 agreement with the FARC is so complex. So, you know, there's so much to talk about. We're getting more questions, but I'm going to ask Nelson a few of the questions. There's some we can sort of link together, Nelson. One person asked if the lack of FARC members, like key FARC members in the special jurisdiction is reducing the jurisdiction's legitimacy. So they named Garzón and Marquez and others. And given how slow the process is, are you expecting that there'll be a longer time period to deal with the cases, or is that being addressed? And is there general frustration, or do you feel there's frustration with, I guess, impunity for FARC members? And is that leading to some targeted killings of FARC or combatants? Or demobilized combatants, I would hope, but we don't know these days.
Thank you, Kimberly, for the question. There are too many. I will try to summarize to answer them. I start to say that the system is not going slow. I believe it's going follow the normal standard of speed of this kind of justice. And maybe because justice doesn't matter what kind of justice is very slow for the victims, they are a frustration. That is normal. That happened in the traditional justice system. That could happen in transitional justice system. And the only advantage of the special jurisdiction of peace and the truth commission is that the truth are coming very fast, faster than any other kind of process. That is the only accomplishment we can celebrate right now. There are a lot of truth that are now delivered to from the system to the citizens. Is truth. Maybe my concern is that the frustration is because there are too much truth coming, and maybe people was not ready to absorb too much truth coming from the system. And I believe for the future, maybe the new generations and the historians later will say, maybe the big contribution of this peace agreement was the truth, even if the justice never arrived. And because if we know what happened, we can avoid to happen again and again. That is my main idea coming from this situation. It's not easy to deliver justice to all the victims, but if unless they get the truth, they get some things that was not possible before. For example, Paola could present the comparison of the Act 975 adopted in 2006 at the time of the incorporation of the paramilitary groups. At that time, was not truth, not justice. Was a very bad situation for the victim because the victim didn't get the truth with the paramilitary process. Now, with the peace agreement of 2016, left people get the truth. And maybe as more than that, to this special jurisdiction of peace could be too much at this moment. This jurisdiction is still working for 12 years more. It's not the case of the Truth Commission because the Truth Commission has only 3 years mandate, and some people are arguing that because COVID, they made it more time. I don't have the answer for that. but the official or the legal mandate is for the Truth Commission is only 3 years, going until this November for the final report. But the special jurisdiction of peace has 12 years more to work, and even 5 years more later. And I believe at that moment, that means in 12 years, now I can say we had truth, but I believe in 12 years, we had some kind of justice too, delivered by the special jurisdiction of peace. Even if the justice take time, in 12 years, I believe some kind of justice will be delivered to the victims.
Thank you, Nelson. There are obviously a lot of questions, a lot of things happening right now too in Colombia. So I think we're all looking forward to the final report of the Truth Commission coming up later this year, and watching for advances on the special cases in the special jurisdiction. There are a number of other questions, but I wanted to touch base with the panelists and with Stephen if we should still go ahead with some more questions. Yeah, there's still, is that okay?
I had a question here from John Packer.
Yes.
John Packer.
So I'm just going to have to jump in, Kimberly. It's Wade here. Unfortunately, I had this scheduled just until the half hour. I've got another call I've got to jump off for, unfortunately. I don't mean to interrupt the proceedings, and I certainly want to thank Stephen and you and Nelson and Paola in particular. I learned so much from both of them, and I look forward to meeting them both in Colombia. And I do have to jump off for this other webinar, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Wade.
Yes.
Your story was captivating at the from
I want to take the question of John Packer because he said that
can we just hold on and say a proper goodbye to Wade as he's leaving us, and then we'll bounce it back to you, Nelson.
Yeah, you bet. Okay,
so,
wonderful.
Thanks so much, Wade, and we'll be in touch, and we'll let you know about the end of this discussion, because we probably have about 20 or 25 more minutes to go.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Yes, sorry, Nelson, go ahead. Do you want to respond to John's question?
Yes, John Packer question about the number of trials that take only 10 months. That is true, but we need to understand the difference. The Nuremberg tribunals was a bankers tribunals, and was the victors tribunals, and was no transitional justice, was no negotiated peace agreement, was a victors tribunal. The winners of the Second War imposed the tribunals, and they unilaterally organized the trials and submit some people to the tribunals. That is very different to this case, where the special jurisdiction of peace is no victors, is an agreement between different sides, the FARC and the state, and in order to deliver a transitional justice, and it's not possible to have winners and losers in this process. And in order to avoid winners and losers, it's not possible to go as faster as some people ask. And that is my understanding of the situation. This take more time, is going very fast, deliver the truth, but it's going slowly to deliver the justice.
Thank you, Nelson. We have a question here from Carlos Zapata about rural reform, the first article of the 2016 Accord, and his position that it won't be implemented in this current political environment or in this current government in Colombia. And will it be possible to achieve sustainable peace without a more comprehensive rural reform? Wade already made reference to that. but would the peace accord work in the absence of such reform? I wonder if Paola wants to look at that, because Paola's been doing some work around women and a gender perspective in some rural development projects. And so, do you need...
Digamos, yo no haría referencia específicamente al tema de reforma rural integral porque pues, no tengo los elementos, pero sí, digamos, hay en términos de reparación de las mujeres en lo que tiene que ver con el acceso a la tierra, pues, digamos, se han mostrado múltiples dificultades desde que no existe información real que muestre, digamos, cuál es el estado real actual de acceso de las mujeres a la tierra, pero también, digamos, las dificultades que tienen las mujeres en los procesos en general de desarrollo rural, ¿no? La falta de acceso a insumos, la falta de acceso a capacitación técnica, la falta de acceso a crédito y demás, pues todos estos se han convertido en barreras que yo también diría que son barreras estructurales para que haya una reparación real en términos de género. Pero también vi en las preguntas que se hablaba un poco del tema de la voluntad política y cómo, digamos, un poco había sido primero el proceso con los paramilitares y ahora el proceso con las FARC. Y yo creo que esto se puede ver desde varias dimensiones, ¿no? Yo creo que se puede ver desde el punto de vista, bueno, no hemos tenido la reparación, tenemos un programa que en general va muy atrasado, con muy pocos resultados, pero yo creo que también se puede ver desde otros puntos de vista, y es que hoy, a pesar, digamos, que el tema del contexto político en Colombia es complejo, pues el proceso de justicia transicional sigue andando. Seguimos en este proceso de justicia transicional, las entidades siguen actuando y tenemos varios activos que yo no encuentro pequeños. Yo encuentro que en Colombia contar con este marco de incorporación del enfoque de género y étnico, por lo menos a nivel jurídico, es una ganancia importante. Contar con un acuerdo de paz que tiene incorporado el enfoque de género de esta manera tan fuerte gracias al movimiento de mujeres es importante. Y contar con un movimiento de mujeres maduro que hoy le hace ese seguimiento técnico, que le hace, que interpela los mecanismos de justicia transicional con conocimiento y con hacer crítico, pues creo que no es menos. Entonces, yo pondría también el tema de la voluntad política en medio de esas otras situaciones que en últimas, pues no separan de los retos y las deficiencias importantes que hay, pero que también pues nos hacen mirar con esperanza lo que está pasando y lo que va a venir.
Thank you, Paula. I've just been reflecting on some of the comments myself, and I have to say, I'm working with Paula and another colleague right now on an evaluation of the mission to support the peace process of the OAS. And I think so we're looking at all these different types of transitional justice processes, territorial, engagement, dialogue. And in one sense, of course, there's a very challenging peace accord. Colombia's always had a very advanced legal framework and a progressive constitutional court. And then when you go to the territory, to the rural areas, you have a sort of, it's an eye-opening experience. But on the other hand, I think what we're seeing is just a really high level of participation at the local level. And I think that level of participation, of true and effective participation in these different mechanisms, I think they take time. There is a chance for frustration, but slowly things are moving along. Having the funds overall for the government to implement, as someone noted, will be a big challenge. I just wondered if there are other questions. I know Robert had a question, but I think he already had to leave. He wanted to know about the rise of new criminality. and if, although it preys on young and unemployed, is it based on the old politics of the FARC versus the state? Or the question is it based on that old paradigm or that old conflict, or is it more about criminal gangs being driven solely by greed and personal financial gain? And can the reconciliation process, or will the reconciliation process have any effect on this new criminal activity?
Yes, they are a phenomenon of new criminality, and the only link with the former situation is the inequality. That is the only link. But the real or the political situation is different. Because at the time of FARC controlled the territory as a like a state authority. And when the FARC was in place, FARC was able to govern the territory as a only authority of the place. What happened now? Now we don't have a new criminal organization controlling a territory. They are only controlling some kind of illegal businesses. They are not. They control some elements of the territory, but only in order to run a specific business. Could be transportation of cocaine or extraction of minerals, etc. But they are not governing a territory as FARC did before, because at the time of FARC, they governed a municipality and they deliver justice for intrafamiliar violences. They deliver justice in labor law. If the employer didn't pay the employee, they deliver justice for any issue in the community. Now, the new criminal organization, they are not deliver justice in the area. They are only organize illegal businesses and no more than that. They are not organizing a civil society governing by them. That is a little different, and they are a big fragmentation, because at the time of FARC, sometimes we say, okay, in this territory is controlled by FARC, this other is by the Colombian state authorities, and they take care to don't cross the border. At the time of the K1 was the situation. The K1 was controlled by the FARC and the other areas by the state authorities, and they never crossed the border. Now it's very different, because the new criminal organizations are only running business, are not governing the territory, are not deliver justice to the member of the community, and it's a more complicated situation. And the only link is the inequality. Inequality happened before, is still going. And the other issue that is the same is that the Colombian state had three economies. We had the legal economy, we had the informal economy, and we had the illegal economy. And these three economies have the same importance in the Colombian economy. That means the illegal economy is almost the same amount of money that the legal economy, but they are in the middle, informal. Legal, informal, and illegal. And people, for example, when I present the case of the young people, one of the three had opportunity in the legal economy, one of the three had the opportunity in the informal economy, and the third one, the only opportunity is in the illegal economy. And that is the situation for the new criminality, because they are a third sector of the economy that is illegal economy, and is almost the third of the gross domestic product of Colombia is running in this illegal economy. And this is the only option for one of the three zones, and that is increasing the new criminality.
Thank you for that, Nelson. I wanted to ask Paola for a last comment, and then we're going to wrap it up. Paola, I wanted to ask if you have a comment on the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war during the armed conflict, and any observations you have either on individual or collective reparations for women who've been victims of sexual violence.
Sí, bueno, voy a aprovechar para decir que pues efectivamente pues uno de las luchas que ha tenido el movimiento social de mujeres en Colombia es que se visibilice la violencia sexual como un hecho común de la guerra, como un hecho instante común, que digamos tuvo unos fines concretos y que fueron parte de esos fines fueron desmovilizar, digamos, o desarmar, perdón, o desarticular, perdón, las expresiones colectivas de las mujeres, su trabajo social, político, humanitario. Y eso pues obviamente hace que la violencia sexual pues se tenga que entender como un tema asociado al conflicto armado, que hace parte de las estrategias de los grupos armados contra la población y contra las mujeres. Aprovecho aquí también para comentarles algo que me pareció interesante, y es que dentro de los decretos que expidió el Estado colombiano para reglamentar este tema de la reparación colectiva, que fueron posteriores a la ley de víctimas, a la ley del año 2011, se crearon unas reglas específicas de reparación para los grupos indígenas y para los grupos afrocolombianos, para los pueblos afrocolombianos. Y allí también se incorporaron unos temas interesantes en temas de género y en lo que tiene que ver con la violencia sexual. Entonces, estos decretos y este marco jurídico hace el llamado a que se reconozcan las formas de violencia sexual que sufrieron las mujeres indígenas y afrocolombianas dentro de sus comunidades, pero además el impacto que eso tiene dentro de del acervo del bien colectivo de esos pueblos, ¿sí? Entonces, la violencia sexual que sufrieron algunas de las mujeres indígenas y algunas de las mujeres afrocolombianas no puede ser considerada simplemente como unos hechos que se repitieron en varios casos, sino que tiene que verse como parte del daño que sufrió el colectivo. Como las relaciones de género, las relaciones intergeneracionales que se vieron fracturadas por estos temas de violencia sexual deben hacer parte, deben considerarse como parte del daño que se le hizo al colectivo, desde lo cultural, desde lo social, desde lo político. Entonces yo creo que estos son también estándares importantes que hay que tener en cuenta y que nos llaman no solamente a la violencia sexual desde el punto de vista de las mujeres individualmente, sino también como parte de esta optimización que sufrieron los grupos indígenas y afrocolombianos en Colombia.
Thank you. So then you're taking sexual, sorry.
I had a last comment about the collective acknowledgement of the victims, and the Special Jurisdiction of Peace has already recognized 230 groups, between them many women, and that or Aboriginal communities, Afro-Colombian communities, and that is very important because in normal situation, the victim is individual, but in the Special Jurisdiction of Peace, they are the possibility to recognize as a victim a group, and a collective group of people, and the Special Jurisdiction of Peace has already recognized 230 groups.
Thank you. I think on Paola's slide, she had a total like application of over 700 groups starting the process, but they haven't all been sort of moved along in the route we saw.
En el proceso administrativo de reparación.
Sure, right.
But
there's different process because that's reparation. Okay. And here I am talking about a special jurisdiction.
In the courts, right. Yeah. But I think in both we've seen that there's a certain level of both cultural rights, collective rights of Indigenous and Afro-Colombians, and also with a gender focus, and women's groups also recognized as collectives, at least in the administrative collective reparations process. So I wanted to thank both of you for your responses and for our participants for all their interesting questions. And I hope a sufficient number were able to understand both Spanish and English in our bilingual session today. So I'm going to pass it back to Stephen.
Thanks, Kim. The fact that we have 23 people left suggests that there are many multilingual participants today, and that's a really great sign. So before thanking the panelists in particular and our partners, I'd like to just flag two strategic takeaways that I'm carrying with me from this fascinating and very rich conversation today. And the first is about time. I really appreciated Nelson's distinction between the time frame for truth and a Truth and Reconciliation Commission being able to deliver a lot more truth than Colombians have had access to in 3 years. So just in these 3 short years, but that being very different from the 12, 15, or maybe even 20-year time frame that will probably be required for all of the, even the exemplary cases, which are, let's remember, it's just a sample of the universe, right? But the exemplary cases being treated by the special jurisdiction in an effective way. And that being, again, very different from the time frame that it would require to actually address a whole range of other problems, such as discrimination against ethnic minorities or women, or violence against both, and many others that are related to conflict and violence dynamics in the country. I'm equally taken by Paola's insistence and coming back to the insistence that, given these timeframes, in fact, in order to make sure that the substantive advances to which the 2016 Accords have opened the door, that they don't get lost in this long time frame, 3, 12, 15, and particularly in order to make sure that the deeper issues, if you will, beyond the prosecution of those directly accused of massive human rights violations, that the deeper issues don't just fall off the agenda and get forgotten. As I've seen happen in too many other peace processes that I've worked in and on over the past 30 years, including in Guatemala, which also had great peace accords, right? But very few structural reforms were actually implemented or have been implemented in the 30 years since the 1994 Comprehensive Accords in Guatemala. So in order to avoid that in Colombia, to the extent that it's possible, 3 major elements are required. Political will of the state, indispensable, and that can be nurtured, right? It's technical assistance and financial assistance and political pressure from the international community, the UN, Canada, Friends of Colombia, et cetera, very important. But just as important, if not perhaps more, particularly ensuring that these structural issues, the deep inequities get addressed in a serious consequential way, is pressure from below, including pressure from organized ethnic indigenous peoples communities and their federations and their associations, including pressures from women's organizations and their federations across Colombia and so on. Without that third element in particular, I must say that based on my experience in other contexts, I fear that even 12 years won't be enough. And then in fact, that the bigger problems will get forgotten, that nothing close to the investment, political, financial, and other investments that it would take to make those reforms happen will occur, even in a country that's as wealthy as Colombia. So I don't want to end on a negative note, because I take Paola's insistence on that third element as a call to action and a call for also international Friends of Colombia to support those women's organizations and indigenous peoples organizations and peasant organizations and victims associations and so on, who have a vested interest in ensuring that peace does not just remain on paper in Colombia. So thank you so much to all the panelists, including Wade, for your brilliant presentations and answers to these difficult questions. Thanks to all the participants for sticking with us to the end and for asking really good questions along the way. I'm super happy personally to see that some of my students who work on these issues are still online. That's quite exciting. Thanks to our partners, first of all, to Kim and Asa of the Just Governance Group and Paola of the Just Governance Group in co-crafting this project, this initiative together. Thank you also to Carolina Shimada and Rob Reddy and others from the Latin America and Caribbean group of the Canadian International Council for also contributing to making this a success. And last but not least, thank you so much to my dear colleagues at CIPS, the Canadian Institute for Peace and Security, and our Fragile States Network for hosting this and for graciously allowing to go considerably over time, but hopefully, so thanks everybody, including Andrew, the technician, for sticking with us over time. And hopefully this will have been worthwhile for all of you. So thank you
very much. Thank you, and good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone, and to be continued in another time.